Excellent. Um, so previously on the other sessions and in these couple of weeks that we made the self-paced phase of the training, we cover all this. Okay, all in green was covered in sessions like this one, and the one in orange was the one that we were um, filling with assignments and with videos and with kind of tutorials to move forward. So now we are trying to catch up a little bit with a specific activity, and then we can concentrate in the post audit activities. Um, so yeah, thing first, the tools that we included in the previous part section of the training. A quick recap of only three tools. We use Nessus, the vulnerability scanner, and here to give an example or a refresher of things that we can obtain with this tool. First, we will have vulnerabilities in network accessible devices. We can find this kind of stuff with Nessus. Also, vulnerabilities in servers accessible through the internet. So it's very good to make this differentiation, because in some audits or some people, they overfocus on only trying the websites or public accessible assets. However, it might be very powerful to also try to analyze computers and local network devices. The routers are very valuable to also include with this tool. Yeah, and it concentrates in focused on the specific known vulnerabilities that might be exploited in all of these devices, servers, etc. So again, Nessus is very powerful, and it's very recommended that if you use just a few of these tools in real case scenarios, Nessus is a very good candidate to be one of those two tools, right? And one of the other things, um, one of the other things is that these specific recommendations, that there are recommendations that are provided for all of the vulnerabilities that are found. Okay. um Excellent. Many other things, of course, but those are probably the most important ones. The other tool that is very powerful is Nmap or ZenMap. In the material, I explained the difference, but basically Nmap is a command line version, it's only text, and ZenMap is a graphical interface uh, around Nmap. And it's very good to do network mapping to understand which devices are connected to our to the local network. Um, Also, it's very good to give an initial assessment of specific network devices to understand if their firewalls are on or off, and or if these devices are running specific services that are unknown, etc. And also, it's very powerful to assess internet visible servers. Again, if have a website or something like that, I can understand which ports are open, which ports are closed, if there are any kind of firewall protecting those ports or on services again, and we can retrieve some relevant information about the services that can end up in our audit report. Also, when we are doing the network mapping, we can find strange devices. If that happens every now and then when we analyze a local network and we find like these four devices that nobody knows what they are. So that's also interesting to follow up. Most cases it would be some sort of printer, a scanner, or some connected device that the people in the organization, they don't know this is that that device is connected, or that that device had access to the network in the first place. And yeah, enable ports and services, but just what I said. and information about devices that might be useful to research vulnerabilities. Examples. Sometimes here we will find some open services. Imagine FTP or imagine a web server even. And Nmap has the capability to understand or to query the version of these services. And when we have the version of these services, we can research on the site, like if that specific version had any problems or something like that. Usually this is well covered by Nessus, but it doesn't hurt to have another source of information that might be useful for this as well. And many other things. Nmap is very, very powerful. It has a lot of different modules. However, we are covering the basics here. And the last tool would be to show in this quick recap is the WP Scan. Again, this is a tool that is designed to scan WordPress websites based in with the WordPress technology, and this very used lately because I don't remember the most recent percentage, but I remember like a couple of years ago, 25% of the whole internet in terms of websites was based on WordPress. So it's very, very popular, very, very used. So it's also a very recurrent tool that we use in audits because many of our organizations are hosting website-based, WordPress-based websites. So yeah, this tool, WP Scan, can identify vulnerabilities in WordPress-based websites. Also, it's very cool to detect all versions of WordPress that many of them are vulnerable. Or when they update those versions, they are solving or fixing some known vulnerabilities. Also, we try to find vulnerable themes and plugins installed in our websites. Again, a very common practice or very best practice with WordPress websites is to lower, like try to keep the number of themes and plugins to a minimum. And we can also here can understand if there are a lot of plugins or a lot of themes installed in a WordPress website. That also might make it to our report. A list of users that, depending on how sensitive is the organization behind the website, this might be a problem. Maybe they want to keep their users anonymous, but the way those usernames are constructed, they might give away the identity of these people. And other minor things like configuration backups available. There are other objects that are also interesting that WP Scan detects. Okay, again, all of this is in the I'm gonna try to go quickly to here. Excellent. This is here. Okay, you have access to this site, and for here you have the page for Nessus, so you can install this tool and use it. There are a couple of videos there. Same for WP Scan and same for SandMap. It was very interesting that someone suggested another tool that they use for WordPress, and I was playing with it like these past days, and the tool is wpsec.com. And is I really liked it because it was a very graphical thing. You need to create an account, and with the free account you can scan like one website or something like that. And once you scan a website, you may receive a report like this one. Okay, in the videos we left, we were playing with this example website, and I used the same one to try these two tools, so we can compare a bit the two tools, and the results are kind of similar. Probably the one we have in the videos have more information, a little bit more information. However, it doesn't hurt to have a very easy to use tool like this one. maybe we can complement our analysis with this. But for instance, this tool also detected an old version of WordPress, and also detected the theme that is used, etc. Maybe in a real case scenario for a website, it will show more things, because this website here is very simple. It was made years ago to never be updated, so we can test these tools. However, in a real world scenario, probably we will have many plugins, many themes, and yeah, it will show more results. Okay. A topic we left behind in a previous session because of time was open source intelligence. This is a very divisive topic or method in SAFETAG, because there are a group of auditors that they rely a lot on this method, and there are others that they never dive a lot very deep into this. However, just to give you an overview, this is again the method in SafeTag with the respective link. You will have this PDF as long with it alongside the video, and basically this helped us to understand everything that is available on the internet about the organization and its members, that that is available on internet. And this is not hypothetical. This happens many times. And we have organizations that we are auditing. They are doing, for instance, they have non-public projects that they really don't want people outside to know they are working on. And when you go through this process, you find that it's public, that actually somebody else in social media, or a media outlet, or and maybe even friend organizations on a blog post, they disclose that this organization is doing this secret project. So this is very cool to add to our report and to share with the organization, so everybody is in the same page, with the fact that they are being that secret they want to keep is not a secret in reality, but they didn't find out that until that moment. Same with the identity of collaborators, in some cases founders, or stuff like that. So in those cases, when the organization has some secrets that they want to keep, might be a very good use case for conducting this method here. Yeah, so yeah, basically what I said. I almost was reading what coming next on the slide, but yeah, that's pretty much the idea behind this. Usually I don't conduct this activity that much, except when as I said, when I know there is information that shouldn't be public, but the information exists, I go through this. However, in most of the audits I conducted more recently, that wasn't the case. So I prefer like to give the tool, to show the tool, and to let people play with this on its own pace. Okay, the tool is the OSINT framework, and it's basically a directory of other tools. Okay, here I have, let's see if it's too terrible to have some soon. Yes, you will have many different categories here, and for each category you can map other subcategories and stuff, and in the end you will have a list of tools, many, there are hundreds of tools here. So for instance, if you have an email address, you can just click email address, and then what do you want? A search, common email formats, verification of emails, if these emails are inside data breach, etc. It's very interesting. Spam reputation lists. Then it can give you a tool. Maybe this one won't work. I don't know. It's been a while since the last time I used this one. So you can click, you go here, and then you can um, put here a domain. Yeah, follow the instructions of each tool. Okay, it's, to be honest, very powerful. This is very cool. If you have a telephone number, maybe you can try to any of these tools to understand if you can see the owner of this device, this phone number. Warning, a lot of these services are very US oriented, so some of these tools maybe won't give you the right answers, and especially for things like telephone numbers or names. um, there will be probably there sh should be something with names, um, because it's connected to databases that are from people from the US, etc. However, the invitation here is just to play, no? Depending on the information you would have. Some tools are so simple that you only put one field and search for it. It's very, again, very powerful. Um, would be interested to see if I can just expand everything, so you can see how big is all of this. Um, but again, hundreds of tools are here available for you. The most used ones are emails, domain names, phone numbers, yeah, mostly that, and names of people in case you are receiving, for instance, communications from somebody that is using a name and last name to identify themselves, and many other things like that. So yeah, OSINT framework, you will have the URL so you can play with it. Okay. um I don't know if there are any questions so far. um well, as always, I will be looking at the chat. Yeah, and however, I want again to show this. We already saw this, okay, in a previous session, but from now I will probably repeat it today and the next one. It's a very good tool to understanding the threat vulnerabilities and recommendations like flow for an audit. All of this information that I'm sharing, all of these tools I'm sharing are aiming to basically try to find vulnerabilities. Okay, now that I know in the beginning of the audit that we did a risk matrix or whatever thing, and after the interviews and all of that, I know the threats, or I have a better sense of the threats that the organization is perceiving, and then I'm gonna start doing a lot of activities just to find weak spots. Okay, and this is covered here in the vulnerabilities phase. And once we did all of these activities and we have a list of vulnerabilities, we are ready to sit down and to propose recommendations based on those vulnerabilities. Sometimes you won't need like to actually sit down because some vulnerabilities are so common across the board, previous organizations, that you already know the answers to these problems. So and the message here is that sometimes it will be easier than it sounds. However, this is kind of the formal flow of how the information pieces in an audit can be done. Can, yeah. Super. So given that we already run all of these technical tools and all of that, next steps, what's next? Um, this happens. This is again not a hypothetical. It's usual that during all of this process you find new things. Okay, given that nobody thought about the fact that they use another technology or that they are engaging with some other people that were in your initial scope of the audit, many things. Okay, so if you find new things that might have affected the entire process, you might be interested in to go back to some of these activities and just repeat for the specific pieces of information or new assets. For instance, a common one, websites. Sometimes in the middle of the process, they say, oh, that's true. We have a website, we have another public website, but nobody thinks about it because, that project ended and it's, yeah, nobody's maintaining that site. So that's terrible to hear in general, and it might worth it to go back and run some tests on that website and so on. Maybe a server, maybe a computer. Sometimes sometime I had an organization that and we also have these three computers that nobody uses except for the interns, that we sometimes have interns and they use these laptops, and those laptops in general are very poorly maintained. So it was worth it to go back and check some security configurations on those computers. Just to give you a couple of examples. And another next step, it could be to give responsive support. This is what happens if you find something very easy to fix or something very urgent that you might be interested um, into solve, and you can solve it without any issues. That could be another next step, and from there you might want to debrief the organization. You might want to share with the organization what you did and all some recommendations, etc., and go directly to the implementation plan or risk reduction plan. This is our fancy name to basically recommend things so they can improve their security. So this is closer to the report. This will be implemented inside of the report, and is our final product of the audit process. We'll be talking about some of these things next. And yeah, once I implemented, I recommended, I build the report with the things I want them to do to improve their security. I want to follow up probably to see if everything was okay, if they understood everything, if they need help with anything specific, etc. But again, we'll be talking about all of these things later on. Starting with responsive support. This is kind of divisive, or not divisive, but it's not that obvious to understand the full scope of this in many cases. Again, here you have the respective method in the SAFETAG website. But in summary, is basically helping with something that is immediate, something that you can fix easily, or also try, or maybe it's not that easy to solve, but it's something very urgent. And yeah, some classic examples. This happens all the time. Conducting short trainings. I don't remember an audit that didn't have a training component. And this is something that some of us we are advocating to include in a more formal way in the project design. However, at the end of the day, it depends on the style of each auditor, etc. Yeah. So yeah, another example is configuring tools or devices. It might be even the computers. While I'm interviewing people and I'm checking on their devices, their computers, if I see that none of them had automatic updates enabled, maybe I can just do it. Just now that we are here, maybe what about turning on the automatic updates? That's a way to do responsive support. And it might be, of course, more complex than that. Making sure a very vulnerable technology is no longer used. Uh, the legend said that many years ago, a lot of people in some countries were using a lot of BlackBerry technologies. We are talking about 2011, 2010, probably. And one of the reasons this technology was very widely used in many, at least in many Latin American countries, was because it was pitched as a very secure technology. So nobody could see your messages and things like that. However, around 2012, 2013, maybe it was even earlier. I don't remember the exact year, but around those years, someone discover a way to just intervene to monitor the messages of a BlackBerry device, and in the end of the day, it was easy. It was very easy. The only thing you need to know is the PIN number, or like the username of that phone, and you could decrypt all the data. So that was a very unsafe technology at that point. And if you do something like SafeTag in that context, probably you want to help them to stop using BlackBerry like right away. Um, to give you that very dated example. And yeah, and also, for instance, implementing urgent processes, that's also a good example, or helping them implement an urgent process. Yeah, and any other thing you can and you want to do. Okay, you're not obligated to do any of this, and this, it is not expected in a SafeTech based assessment that the auditors can solve whatever thing. No, it will require the person that, wanting to do it, and also if they can do it. In a couple of times, and organizations needed help with very obscure technologies, even with coding or reviewing code in languages I don't know. So it's like, well, I would love to help, however, it's not something I can actually do. So we write this into the report and we move on, because it's not yeah, it doesn't apply. Okay, so yeah, it's basically that the responsive support is anything you want it to be, um yeah, that you can and want to do during the time frame of the audit. Cool. So then we will have the debrief. Basically, the debrief, for me, is like a fancy word that doesn't have any very good translation in my language, but we want to basically summarize to the organization and communicate to the organization what we did. So we want to inform them about what was done. These were the activities I conducted, or if that's too complex for the organization, we can tell them what assets did we. It's not the same to say that I did a vulnerability scanner, scanning on your websites and your internet facing servers, than simply say like I did some tests on your website and I did some tests in your emails. It will depend a lot on the how, let's say, technical are the people, your points of contact in the organization, but in general it's a healthy practice to tell them what you did, so they can also compare these to your previous agreements. No, like I told you in the beginning that I was going to do this and this, and I did exactly that, and probably I did these other two extra activities, or probably I couldn't do this specific activity we agreed to because reason A, B, and C. Um, but the meat, the most important part is what is coming next, like the most important findings. I found out that, I don't know, your there are a lot of people that have access to social media that are not working anymore with you, and you need to solve that problem. Um, or maybe you don't know it, but your website is infected and somebody is putting a code there to, I don't know, mine cryptocurrency, and that's important and you should be doing something about it. The most pressing things should be there. um general aspects requiring attention. Like for instance, it's very usual indeed to propose organizations that they need to have a process to update all the computers, or to stop using non-licensed software of a specific type. Things like that are kind of common. um the it's interesting, yeah, which next steps in the immediate and short term, like things you can fix today. Like, maybe the three more important things are these three things, and you can start now. That is also very useful. How their audit report will look like. Usually here I say to people, you know what, very briefly, you will be hearing from me. I will send you like a PDF file or a Word file or a whatever file, where I will put you there like the all the recommendations. Not only the three things I tell you can do now, but maybe other 10 things that you can do in the medium or long term, etc. Who is receiving the audit report? This is very, very important, because sometimes there is an expectation that everybody will receive the report, when in reality the information there is so sensitive that it's better to just share it with the specific people. Usually your points of contact from the beginning of the process, and whoever they said they can also receive that report. And how we'll be sharing that report. Again, as I said a couple of times, this information is very, very, very sensitive. The information in that report, and it's important to treat it with uh, the utmost security. Like, yeah, try to share it on secure or over secure channels. Yeah, to avoid this report to be leaked or to be disclosed to any unintended actors. And when the report will be ready and shared. This is kind of controversial inside of the community, because indeed we do. I mean, kind of a spoiler, I believe you were invited to a presentation in a couple of days about an evaluation that we did on the SAFETAG methodology under a project. And one of the findings is that people, beneficiaries or beneficiary organizations are waiting too much for these reports, sometimes even months for these reports, mostly because some auditors like to make very long and comprehensive reports, and that takes a lot of time. However, that depends a lot on the style of the auditor. We know many other auditors that they do a two-page uh, list of recommendations and they call it a day. That's also an option. So, however, just to manage expectations with the organization, is good at this point of the process to tell them, you know what, in 1 week, in 3 days, or maybe in 1 month, you're receiving my report. And there usually is very, very good to organize with them like a call or something like that. So you send the report, you give them time to read it, and then you can have this call to ask them if everybody was clear for them, or if they need more clarification, if they have questions of things they expected to see in the report and are not there. Things like that are also important. Yeah. Once I told them like everything was fine, probably I'm going home if I'm flying or translating to another place to to conduct the audit. And now it's a very good time to start working in the implementation plan or risk reduction plan. And to do this, again, method and activity in the slides. Um, One of the things I want to do is centralizing all of the recommendations. And here, I mean, I can use many sources of information to develop these recommendations. The first source is the vulnerabilities, of course. Every weak point that I see or I saw during that audit can be a source of I can, from each one of the vulnerabilities, try to formulate a recommendation. Also the threats detected in the facilitated activities. Hopefully, and most of the times, all of this will be connected. Okay, maybe the threats in the activities, mapping threats, you will hear something like, you know what, we don't want the social media to lose access to social media or have our social media hacked, right? And then during the audit, you were interviewing people managing this, and they will say, you know what, some people that are not working here anymore still have access to these accounts, and you might label that as a vulnerability. So even when you have two different sources of information, the threats and the vulnerabilities, all of them, you might you might get to the same information in terms of recommendations, because you will see there a connection. However, sometimes sometimes you will find things in the threat modeling exercise that doesn't come out from in the vulnerabilities, in the activities to detect vulnerabilities. That's also a possibility. Many reasons can explain this. It can be one that, honestly, they are scared about that, and it's a possibility that something goes wrong with that specifically. However, in the scope of what you were assessing, you didn't find any problems. Like, they are doing a good job protecting from that themselves, from that threat specifically. Or maybe it could be that there is no way to for you to, with your activities, to assess that specific threat. Okay, sometimes maybe I'm taking this to the extreme, but they are worried about, I don't know, an alien invasion, and it's like, okay, probably that won't show up in my activities, but it might be a source of concern, and maybe I want to develop a recommendation for that. In practice, um, it's less common to put recommendations about things that we didn't find a vulnerability around that, because it would take too much space. Uh, it would require a very longer report, and that's something that we don't like to do, no, because the bigger the report is, more probable that the organization will feel overwhelmed and they don't do anything about it. So we really want to focus on recommendations of relevant things for them that might be actually a threat. And the other case is also a possibility. Sometimes we find vulnerabilities of things that they didn't have an idea about. So when we made a threat modeling exercise, they didn't thought about social media takeover. And then when you are doing your activities, you discover that probably, or they never think about email compromises. And then you, during the checkups and interviews, you discover that there are actual problems with the email. Like, somebody is accessing this email from a country that you don't have any clue about, or you discover in a Gmail account filters or redirections that are making everything that comes into that email to go to a third person. So you might you that's a huge vulnerability, and that could probably show up in the report. And sometimes people don't talk about this in the threat modeling exercise. So that's another scenario. uh, yeah, capacities and possibilities of the organization as a source of information. Yes, sometimes this is more related to that fact that I discussed like some sessions ago, that maybe there are many ways to solve a problem, and the most obvious, air quoting, way to solve this the problem might require a lot of money, and probably the organization doesn't have that money. Or might require having an IT people, like managing a server or things like that, and they don't have that in the organization. So that's also a source of information that will that will help us determine like which recommendations are we actually giving the organization. So that's another source of information. And then it's not only throwing recommendations, right? Because in some cases you will find organizations that they have a lot of things to do. They may improve their security in, I don't know, 40, 50 different ways. And that will be overwhelming for the organization. So it would be also interesting to prioritize or classify or reorder those recommendations in a way that it makes sense for the organization. So time is short term, is medium term, is long term. Also the impact. Not every recommendation will have the same impact in their security. The cost, some which things are free to solve. Okay, that also could be important. The how difficult it is, especially this is more oriented to more technical recommendations, but this is also a way to classify those recommendations. Here are some tips from experience. The recommendations, they need to be easy to understand for your organization, especially we sometimes have a lot of very technical ones, and they may be very important, and we as technical people, more technical people in that regard, we know they need to address this. But if they don't understand what I'm talking about, they won't do anything about it. So here we need to put the hat of facilitators, the good trainers, and try to explain complex concepts in a very easy to follow way. So that's very, very, very important. Sometimes there may be too many recommendations. I already covered this. It can be overwhelming if you give 50 things to do to the organization. So it's important to prioritize and tell them, yeah, I'm giving you 50 recommendations, but in reality, the most important ones are these 7 or these 5 recommendations. Okay, and you do the rest if you have the time, if you have the bandwidth to do them, to implement them. Here, to give this example, I used to create very long reports, and I was auditing at some point very big organizations, and with very big organizations you will have a lot of vulnerabilities. So for me, the way I see life in general is that I won't keep any information back. Like I would try to tell the organization all of what I found, and while it's good for being rigorous and all of that, it was also in a couple of cases counterproductive, because I shared uh, so much information with these couple of organizations that it was more difficult for them to actually act and do something about those recommendations. So there is the other side of the coin. There are many auditors that they say, I found 50 things, 60 things, but I'm sharing 3 with them. So well, that's also a different style. Okay, I prefer to maybe if the organization I know will get overwhelmed, I prefer to prioritize first, and to tell them I'm giving a big number of recommendations, but you can focus on this very short list, and have the other ones for reference. But in some cases, it will be important to filter and to, you know what, from these 40 recommendations, probably these 15 are are very minor things. So maybe I will just take this out. So they are not thinking about 40 vulnerabilities, but 25. That is still a very big number, but it maybe would be less overwhelming. Or maybe all of the less important recommendations, I can move that to an appendix. So when I give the organization the report, they won't see them. But if they go to the appendixes, the attachments, they will find even more things to do. So that's another way to do it. And it's interesting that in many cases, not some, in many cases, um, we are not exactly aligned. Like I want a 360 vision of the organization, and I'm more worried about their critical processes. That's at least my style, and the organization wants a different thing. They are obsessed with the idea of, again, protecting social media accounts because they were hacked in the past and they are traumatized because of that. So our priorities might be different because they are obsessed or they are hyper focused on social media. And I discovered during the audit that the victims database of this organization is vulnerable. So probably I want to focus more on that. Okay, because the consequences might be way bigger than what happens if there is another account takeover. Um, and this is kind of a tricky balance, because if you see that they really are expecting to see more things to protect their social media accounts, it's good to include something in the report about that. But please try to persuade them that this other problem is also happening and they should be doing something about it as well. So that's another, this risk reduction plan may be a good place to prioritize the right things, or include a wider vision. Okay, but I'm telling you that the organization probably will end up implementing the things that they care about. I mean, it sounds very, it doesn't sound that disruptive when I say it, but yeah. So instead of trying to impose recommendations in the report that they are not aligned with, it's better to first try to convince them that these other areas are also important, and then we give the recommendations. And also the urgent versus important, this is also important. Probably there are things that should be, or that are creating problems at the very immediate term. Yeah, we should be including this into the report, but please don't fill your prioritize recommendations only with things that are urgent. Also, some long-term strategies should be there in the priorities as well. But this will depend a lot on many factors, like how the organization works, how many vulnerabilities did you find, etc. Um, so yeah, I mean, kind of happy that I'm going very fast today. I don't know if you have any questions so far about all of this process, or any of the previous things that we were working. I will give just a couple of seconds so I can drink water. And if not, as always, you can write into the chat. Um, I can move on. I have like a very minor thing before wrapping up. As I said, it would be like a shorter meeting, same for the next one. Um, this tool that an organization in Latin America created. Full disclosure, I was one of the people like building the proposal for this project. So it's kind of familiar to me. However, I wasn't involved in the actual development of the tool. Um, this was developed by SAFETAG Auditors, and they basically, the idea behind this is that it's a difficult process, or there are a lot of moving parts in the audit process, and it would be great if we can systematize a bit the way we document everything, so that might make this process easier or more straightforward. So um Here, if when you click that link in the website, in the slides, you will see like this. You can download this tool. It works in Linux, in Windows, and in Mac OS as well. And it will look something like this. This is my Kali Linux machine, the one that you also have available. You can double click here if you want to try it. And it's very powerful to explain some context, some concepts. For instance, this you remember this thing I told you, that threat vulnerabilities and recommendations, threats in the facilitated activities, vulnerabilities during the whole audit, and then you build the recommendations to build a report. This is very much reflected here. However, I prefer to give you like an overview of other modules that this is also including. When I open this, just for the sake of facilitating the time and whatever, I just loaded test values so I can see the tool already working, the way it would work in a real scenario audit. In this tool, they start with the assets, and with assets, you have here very good examples. Okay, you have web server, that's an asset. Office computers, bring your own device computers, and so on. Even there are non-technical things here like directors and board members, sources, funds. This is a very important asset, and so on. And why we can include all of this? Because we can attach everything else down the road to these assets. So if our organization is hyper focused, so they are very worried about the web server, and that's the reason that they are conducting an audit, we can even filter all the activities down the road that are all that related to the web server or to the computers, etc. No, but this is an example. I mean, if you want to keep it only digital, go for it. Office space, this is also a good asset if you are interested in the physical security side of audits. Perfect. And this is just as easy as just adding more, no problem. Maybe the only weird thing could be um, the category, that every asset they are proposing that has a category. If it's equipment, if it's members, beneficiaries, if the asset is related to reputation of the organization or financial, etc. Okay, super. And after the asset list, we'll have the activities. When we are designing the audit activities, I can say I will do network mapping because they have a physical office, and I can give a brief description. Everything I'm showing you is optional. A couple of times I used this tool, and I didn't have any assets and any activities. I just went directly to the rest of the tool, and it worked just fine. And however, if you are feeling like very good at documenting things, you can say I'm doing network mapping, brief description, and then you can select from this list of assets, what are you covering? In this case, easy network mapping and mapping the office network. But for instance, in the context research, I might be addressing or covering the web server, directors and board members, and sources, just to give an example, and so on. So before going to start the audit officially, I can build as a lone auditor, or maybe as a team with my team of people working in an audit. We can build this list of activities. Great. Then when we start working with the organization, usually we build a risk matrix, the way I showed in the session number 2. And after we finished that exercise, we fill all of this. We fill this list with all the respective threats that were mapped there. And also, it's possible to just do the activity here directly. like when people are doing the activity, we can have somebody filling this page, and in the end you might see the risk matrix. Let's see if this works, because I was having an issue with this in the past. Let me export as an image, maybe it will work. Matrix, matrix. I don't even know the format of this thing. Yeah, okay. We can see if this is working. So in a PNG image, with application, what can here? Maybe Firefox can open an image. Well, I know they are working on fixing a couple of bugs, but let's see if this is working. Well, no issues with this. No, it's having an error. Well, you will find here a cute matrix, similar to the one that we might do with post-its, but in a digital version. However, the real use of this, or the biggest advantage of having the threads documented here, is that once I'm conducting a number of activities during the audit, I can document each one of the vulnerabilities I'm finding. And for instance, I will take this one. The website doesn't redirect to HTTPS version. This is an actual very common vulnerability we find. I can give a description of this vulnerability if I want to. I can select in which activity of all of that are the ones I mapped in the previous tab, and it was in context research apparently in this example, and I can also tag the assets, and this is affecting the web server. And something I really like, that inspired a lot of previous reports, is that we can tie the vulnerabilities to the threats that we mapped into the other exercise. So in this example, somebody in the organization said, you know what, we are worried that a hacker might take control of the website, or that the information about the sources is leaked. Okay. And in this example, in that server, the same server of the website, I don't know, or in some hidden part of the website, I might find information about the sources. So this problem is related to these two things they understand very well, to the point that they propose this to be a threat. Okay, so I'm closing, and I can just, during these 3 days, this week, this number of months, whatever time frame I'm using for the audit, I can slowly be filling this tab. Once I finish with all the vulnerabilities, then I'm ready to propose recommendations. So then at home, I can be here and I can try um, to probably look for specific vulnerabilities. And I can say the inbox of institutional email addresses have weak passwords. They told me that in the interviews, they told me that all the passwords, we asked the people to put their last name and I don't know, the name of an animal. That's very weak. So maybe I can say, you know what, I'm gonna recommend something about it. So I check this. I might be even proposing something that covers many different problems, no? Um, yeah, I believe that I will select only this one. And I can say, you know what, enforce a strong password policy. And I can say this policy should consider elements that are not tied to the staff member, like names, birthdays, etc., etc., and should be at least 20 characters long, and so on. No, I can just do this. This is free. This doesn't have any cost. And implementation time, there may be like, I don't know, maybe in 1 month we can agree how to do this and distribute this among the staff, etc. And I can insert this recommendation. Yeah, it's done, no? And probably would appear at the end or not. It should be around. Here it's just in the top of the thing. And you can even in the implementation cost not put a number, but you can say this is included in IT workload and stuff like that. So yeah, you may also have a list of recommendations, very well documented, very well structured, and with that you can generate a report. But that's something I will do in the next session because it can be a little bit more complex, because there are many possibilities here. So what I want you to have the idea of how to work, is that these threats, vulnerabilities, and recommendations is one of the best ways to document everything during an audit process and to make the recommendations for the organization in a way that they understand, because vulnerabilities and recommendations are coming from our brains. However, we can connect this to the threats that are things that the organization shared with us during the facilitated activities. And when I say, you know what, you should be disabling TLS version 1.1 in your web server, if I just shared that, maybe it would be like, what are you talking about? We don't know anything about this and I don't care. But maybe you can share that recommendation under the light that this will help you to not having your website hacked, for giving an example. That is something that they can understand. So that's pretty much the idea behind this. Let me see if I have everything else. And that's it for now. Again, I will stop the recording in case you have questions. Yeah, yeah, basically that.